to our Connections lecture series for this spring. Before I welcome the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and our special guest lecturer today, I do want to acknowledge President Herbert is here with us. Thank you so much for coming. But thank all of you for coming out and giving up some time to be here. I'm really excited about Nikki and what she has to share with us. Before I introduce our speaker, however, I will invite Jonathan Millen, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, to the podium to briefly share with us the history and purpose of the Connections Lecture series.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Melanie. It's wonderful to be here today. It's a little bit ironic that Melanie asked me to talk about the history and significance of the core lecture, because this is my 4th year here, and I've only been to one lecture prior to this, and that was in the fall of 2019. I was just able to piece it back together. And I remember walking into the St. Francis room, and I think Eric Zelo was running that show at that time. And having been my first Connections lecture, I got to the St. Francis room. I think it started at 12, and I got there at 12:05, and it was standing room only. And it was just remarkable to see faculty and students from not just across the College of Arts and Sciences, but from across the university coming together to talk about an interest that really sat at the intersection of every discipline, and to think about how we can ask questions and engage in discussion regardless of our program of study, but to look at challenges in the world and to share a sense of wonder and a sense of curiosity. So in terms of history, I did a little research, and I found that these lectures used to be every semester, and going back at least as far as 2010, and some of my colleagues might tell me it goes even beyond that. But when you look at the list of lectures before today, they really have been across the disciplines, from the humanities and the social sciences and the sciences. But regardless of the home discipline of the speaker, they've all found a way to talk to us across disciplines about the curiosity and really the breadth of what a liberal arts education is all about. And that's, to me, one of the reasons why this lecture is so important. And when you think about its significance and also its history, one of the things that strikes me is that when the current curriculum was designed years ago by the faculty, they actually built in this lecture as part of the program. And very rarely do you see a lecture being constructed as part of a curriculum. But what was actually said in the core curriculum handbook is that the lecture is a significant way to challenge students to build a community in which we interrogate ideas that goes beyond the classroom, but then that we challenge those students to bring these ideas back to their classrooms, whether it's an art classroom or a marine science classroom or a business classroom or an English classroom, and fill in your discipline of choice. That it's the conversations of ideas between the classes in that space of intersection where sometimes the most interesting conversations take place. And as a dean, that's what excites me the most. It's not so much what you're studying, but how does what you're studying connect with what other people are studying, and then these conversations can take on a life of their own. And so to me, that's what the significance of these lectures are. It really brings our curriculum to life, using what starts in the classroom, takes it outside the classroom, and then hopefully becomes part of a 4-year conversation. So with that, I hope you enjoy with me today's Connections lecture. Thanks, Melanie.
I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Melanie DiLorenzo, and I am the chair of the Connections lecture series this year. And now I'm going to introduce and talk about our Connections lecture guest speaker. Brought up between New York and the Netherlands, Nikki Lindt is a multimedia artist whose work examines climate change, environmental stewardship, and relationship to place. She works primarily in the mediums of painting, video, and underground sound on long-term projects, often collaborating with scientists, philosophers, social scientists, sociologists, and others. With a global perspective, Lindt has participated in residencies at many field stations, including the Tulik Field Station in Alaska, the Abisko Scientific Research Station in Sweden, a project of the Swedish Polar Research Secretariat, the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, and the Urban Field Station in New York City. In 2022, her work was the subject of a feature on CBS Sunday Morning, Please join me in welcoming our guest, Nikki Lindt.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much to the Connections Lecture Series Committee for having me, and to all of you for such a warm welcome. I've been walking around campus this morning, and it's so beautiful here. I live in New York City, so it's such a breath of fresh air to have all this open space and nature. I just love it. I've really enjoyed getting to talk with many of you today. I've spoken with professors, staff, and I've especially enjoyed talking with the students. You guys are bright and enthusiastic, and you have a really, really dynamic college here. I'm excited to speak today about interdisciplinary interactions and collaboration within my work over the years. So I'm going to start with a short video that will give you a window into my world and a bit about my work, and then I'm going to expand on that further in my talk. So the video is made by filmmaker Jenny Schweitzer-Bell, and she's an independent filmmaker. And it actually we were lucky enough that it premiered last year at Mountain Fest, which is a film festival in Telluride, Colorado. So I'm just going to take a moment to switch over and play this video. I've been dealing with issues around the climate crisis for many, many years, so it gets incorporated into my work. I felt really lost in these mysteries of what's happening to the planet right now. I was working on the concept of solastalgia, which is a word that, in contrast to nostalgia, where you have left something behind, solastalgia is where a place leaves you due to development or climate change. The figures were communing with nature, trying to find a connection to nature. I was reading a lot of articles about the changes that were happening in the Arctic. What would that look like in terms of the landscape? I got in touch with scientists there, and they taught me how to read the landscape to see what was happening underneath. For me, then it became my own exploration as an artist and of what I saw and trying to understand it for myself. It was very extreme. Forests where the trees are leaning in all directions because the ground is destabilized underneath them. They look like toys when they're hanging off the side of these thermokarsts. But you could also hear the sounds of the permafrost thawing. And was really my first step into underground recording. There's over 10,000 acres of healthy forests and natural areas in New York City. This became sort of a very natural next step for me to see this gradient of moving from the Arctic to the city that I live in. It's really an interwoven project of the parks and the streets of the city. I just heard the subway go under. Yeah, only in one microphone. This one, which is like directly in the tree, and the subway just went under, and it's like shaking the whole tree. What are the effects on these natural areas in terms of sound? I'm creating these, I call them vignettes, these sort of shorter fixed frame videos paired with the underground sound that I'm recording. As we walk through cities or through nature, there's so much going on. The sounds are quite dramatic. They're quite loud and resonant and melodic, very otherworldly. I really had to wonder, how was the tree, or how are the animals interpreting these sounds, and how is it affecting them? Do they use these sounds as a navigation system? What is the sort of structure of this sound and the meaning of this sound underground? What I've come to realize is that there's this very mysterious place right beneath our feet. When you live in a city, you just start to believe in this cement boxed in world. But it is an ecosystem, and it's an ecosystem that needs to function. The project encourages people to really slow down and listen. There's a whole world there that we rush by all the time. So I'm going to expand on all of that a bit more now. So 5 years ago, I found myself in Alaska, driving on one of the most remote and rough roads in the country called the Dalton Highway, which you can see right there. There's only 3 towns along the way. It's an 8-hour route driving up this road, and the total population is 68 people of those 3 towns. So it's really pretty remote. But before I delve into the story, I'd like to take the time to introduce myself and my work leading up to this particular journey. So my name is Nikki Lindt. I'm a visual and sound artist living in Brooklyn. And for the past 2 decades, my work has focused on environmental awareness and connection to place. I often work on long-term projects in collaborations with scientists, social scientists, philosophers, land managers, and many others. I've done residencies at field stations nationally and internationally, 2 in the Arctic Circle, one being Tulik Field Station, which is, I was at the residency here, and one is at the Abisko Research Station in Sweden, so another part of the Arctic Circle. The Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, which is not that far from here, at least is not as far as the Arctic, that's in New Hampshire. And then the New York City Urban Field Station, which people are often surprised to hear that there's a field station in New York City, but there's about 10,000 acres of forests in New York City. So there's a lot to explore there and learn as well. So I'm going to start by sharing a series that I created a bit more than 15 years ago. And at the time, my work was already solidly focused on the precarious relationship that I felt with the natural world. So this series was quite personal and resonated with my own past. I grew up in a rural area outside of Pittsburgh and spent lots of time in the woods around my house growing up. This early relationship with the natural world has stayed with me, and I've held on to this deep and important connection as I grew into an adult and have lived as an adult. Many of these woods have since been developed into housing lots, so it's no longer the way that I remember it there. And so I started a group of paintings about these memories. And so each painting starts with a figure and a place. And in these paintings, the figures are often trying to find their way within melting and disintegrating landscapes. and trying in their own clumsy way to commune with nature. That's how I often find myself in nature, like not very athletic, but trying to connect nonetheless, as it seems to slip between their fingers. As I was preparing for an exhibition with these paintings, a friend of mine who's a science writer came by to my studio to talk with me about my work. I personally knew that these paintings were grappling with environmental issues and loss, but I felt that there was something else that I couldn't put my finger on. My friend brought to my attention a new term, solastalgia is the word. And at the time, that was in 2008 that this friend was in my studio, this term had recently been coined by an Australian philosopher, Glenn Albrecht. Here's a picture of him. So solastalgia in contrast to nostalgia, which is when it's the longing that occurs when you leave a place. That's nostalgia. Solastalgia is when a place you know well leaves you through climate change or development. And I realized that the concept that I'd not been able to put my finger on in my own work, I realized that it was just named and conceptualized. So I went on to call my exhibition Solastalgia, and then to my surprise, Glenn Albrecht, the philosopher that came up with this term, contacted me. So I guess he had Googled himself and came across my exhibit. And he ended up attending the opening, and it was really cool. It was really nice to meet him. And he became an early collaborator, or maybe more of an influencer through his visit and his comments on my work. He included my work in some of the articles that he wrote after that, which was really cool for me, and I continued to explore this idea in my own work. And I was awoken to this new world of collaboration. I had collaborated with creatives before, but this was new to me. This was a collaboration with a field that was very, very different from mine, but gave me a missing link and a new angle to my work. I was also excited that the relationship seemed to benefit and feed both our work, which was really nice for me. So eventually the series grew into about 50 paintings. Words that are needed in our language and collaboration started to brew further for me when I was contacted by Matthew Schneider-Meyerson and Brent Bellamy. They're both ecological social scientists. Matthew and Brett were writing a book called An Ecotopian Lexicon. They were collecting words that don't exist in the English language but are much needed in this time of climate change. The words they chose are mostly borrowed from other languages, but some also come from poetry or even science fiction. So they were looking for these words that don't exist, but we need. The words are meant to help us imagine how to adapt and even flourish in the face of climate change and the social and ecological adversity that characterizes the present and the future that awaits us. This painting was my contribution to the book. Through these new words, I was able, among other things, to bind some hope to these feelings of loss that I had been connecting to the natural world. I chose the word which in my reading of it represented the pining for something lost, mixed with the hopeful anticipation of something better. So it definitely felt like a good step for me after focusing solely on loss. This felt like a really good direction to be going in. And as you can see in the painting, my figure's in a dark place, but has her eye on a better place to get to. It's amazing what something as simple as a word can do for your outlook. This experience of such an influential collaboration was really a pivotal moment for me. There was this world of new ideas through the many concepts that were in this book that was very important to me. It's probably the book that has made the most impact on me, and I recommend it to all of you. I thought I would throw in a slide with some other books. I see some people nodding. Some people are recognizing some of these books that have influenced me along the way. over the past years leading up to today. I mean, you see the Ecotopian Lexicon, which I just talked about, The Hidden Life of Trees, which is a book about trees as communities and their underground communication. Then you see Mannahatta, and that's a book trying to reconstruct the natural world as it was before Henry Hudson sailed up the Hudson River there. And this author actually joined me on a project that I'll show you later on. Braiding Sweetgrass, which weaves scientific and indigenous knowledge together. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And Should Trees Have Standing, a book by Christopher Stone, written in the 70s. He was a lawyer, and he was arguing for the legal rights for trees. And this movement has kind of gone on. There are some rivers. There's a river in Canada, I believe, that now has some personal legal rights, and in some other countries as well. So here began my journey of immersing myself in collaboration, along with a lot of reading of books and articles, which are sort of one-sided. I think of them sometimes as a one-sided collaboration as well, as you kind of like really have access to somebody's thinking in this book, and you can merge it into your own work or your way of thinking. So until that time, I had been working in the studio alone, 8 hours a day. I love this way of working, as many artists do, as it really allows me to explore ideas internally. But with collaboration, my ideas were developing and moving at a much faster pace. And it was also really fun to collaborate with people. That's definitely another part of it. So collaboration and reading books and articles has been important to my journey since. So several years ago, I remember reading yet another science article on climate change, and this one was specifically about thawing permafrost. For those of you who don't know what permafrost is a layer of frozen ground that stays continually frozen for at least 2 years. But that's the technical definition, but most of it has been frozen for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. And in recent years, permafrost has been thawing due to rising global changes, and that releases methane and carbon dioxide. So in this article that I was reading, I read about collapsing houses and roads, but I wondered, how is this affecting the landscape on the whole? This can't just be happening under the roads and houses, and because that's what was being covered about it. So I reached out to scientists at permafrost labs all over North America to see if I might be able to be in contact with them. And for months, I didn't hear back from anybody. They're a busy bunch doing really important work. But then I did hear back from one. And they were kind enough to agree to show me around in the Arctic and to teach me to read the land to understand what was going underneath it. I'm still collaborating with the scientist that took me around. This is 5 years ago now, Alexander Kolohoff today. So you're putting yourself out there can bring you to new places and new partners. If I hadn't reached out to him initially, I wouldn't be working with him today. So this is the area that you're seeing where it's the research station in the Arctic Circle where I went and where we started this talk on that remote road. You can see it there in the background. So this is where I went to learn about thawing permafrost. Which brings me back to why I found myself in the distant forests and tundras of the Arctic. In the coming days, I saw forests that were destabilized by thawing permafrost. As it thaws underground, it disturbs the stability of the ground. And because of this, you come across forests in the Arctic where trees are leaning and growing in every direction imaginable. Some are even growing horizontally, and they continue to live like that. These are called drunken forests, officially, by the scientists are calling them, and you can kind of see why when you're in them, because it's very disorienting when you're in a forest like this. And these trees are never going to stand straight back up again. This is now their fate and how they're growing because of the thawing permafrost. I also encountered thermokarst slumps And these are also caused by thawing permafrost and melting ice wedges. This is one that I came across in a forest outside of Fairbanks in Alaska. These are huge, gaping, like I would almost call them like sinkhole type holes. Those trees that you see in the background, those are adult trees. So you can, it kind of gives you a scale because they almost look like toy trees when you look at it this way. But these are enormous, and these are all over the Arctic, in the tundra and in the forests. This is what it looks like up there right now. I took notice that the ecosystem was rearranged due to the thawing permafrost, sometimes almost on its head, but incredibly, it was still functioning like that, well, at least for now. And while I was there, I spent a lot of time sketching, thinking, and writing to process what I was seeing. While I was inside these gaping holes and forests that seemed to be from another world, I was also taken by all the lush green foliage around me. I felt I could almost hear the intense growth of the trees, plants, and the other living things. The Arctic Circle has a very short growing season, so everything seems to explode with growth in the spring. I was transfixed while witnessing these terrifying changes, sort of this deep loss of these changes, coupled with such a strong life force. There was like these two things that I was confronted with at once, these two feelings, and this duality became the subject of my work. And of course, I had to think of the word that I had collaborated on, Sehnsucht, despair and hope at once, the two coming together. And this intense firsthand experience of this concept made a tremendous impact on me. And then there were the sounds I heard and recorded underground inside these thermokarsts. The persistent sound of thawing permafrost inside these deep holes in the Arctic landscape was breathtaking. I mean, it was meditative in a way, but at the same time, it was relentless because it didn't stop. So again, sort of these dual feelings. And so I started recording these sounds. When I got back to my studio in Brooklyn, I translated all these materials into large-scale pieces. And within my paintings, I worked in two mediums, watercolor, which has a very light, ephemeral quality, and I paired it with acrylic paint, which is much thicker and denser. So I was working with a duality in the materials as well. But I kept coming back to this strange audio that I had heard and recorded in the underground. There's something about sound that just really transports you to a place or a feeling. I'm sure everybody has songs that take them back to a time, or things that you hear that remind you of being at the ocean. There's so many different forms this takes. So sound has very strong, deep impact, and it became very, very interesting to me. I tried pairing the paintings together with sound, and this combination worked really well. And I felt that this coupling transformed the work into a different kind of experience. I became just so captured by this unseen world enclosed in darkness. So on this trip to Alaska, I met many interesting characters, as you can imagine, all kinds of people. People that end up in Alaska usually have a story. But I also met scientists and other collaborators. And I had a chance meeting that turned out to be really, really interesting for me. So on my flight on the way to the Arctic, and this is what the flight looks like if you go to the Arctic, it's really, really beautiful to fly over that area. I happened to be seated next to an acoustical ecologist. And he wasn't even supposed to sit there. I had someone else, this guy shifted into the seat next to me, and then we started talking. I was like, oh my God, I hit the jackpot. And because I was just really starting to get into sound at the time. And so it was amazing to talk with him. And we stayed in contact, and later I asked him for input on what microphones I might be able to use to record underground better than I had in the Arctic. And he wrote back that he frankly had absolutely no idea, but that I could try a hydrophone, which is normally used for water. And there's these conditions in the, people studying marine biology maybe are familiar with hydrophones here. And so they're typically used in water, and so they were better able to withstand the conditions underground, the moisture and even the dirt getting into the microphone. So my potted plant at home was my first encounter with the hydrophone, and it was really exciting to like touch and strum the leaves and hear these sounds permeating in the soil. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. I had no idea that that would happen. So later that year, after my return from Alaska, I explored the soils and forests of New York State and New Hampshire. I was at a residency in New Hampshire at the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, so I did there, and then also on my own, I was exploring the forest to see what would I hear in these soils. And I spent those days deeply engaged, mostly by myself, in the depths of the forest, listening in to what sounds I could find there. I didn't really have any guidelines on how to do this. It somehow has been an overlooked realm. So it was pure experimentation, which was really, really rewarding. Over time, I also tried out different microphones, so now I have a small arsenal of microphones instead of just the one hydrophone. And among sound professionals, there's a saying or a joke that to put your microphone in the mud means hearing nothing, capturing no sound. But what I was finding was that this incredibly rich frontier right underneath me had all these incredible sounds everywhere I went. So I spent a lot of time just trying everything out. I mean, my husband was getting annoyed. I couldn't stop. And the sound underground in a healthy forest is surprisingly resonant, at times dramatic, and it travels very far. Like if you stomp in the forest and you're listening underground 20 feet away, you hear this sound super clearly, whereas you hardly hear it at the spot where you step. So it's kind of like if you put your ear to your desk and you knock on it, it's much louder than if you hear it. So just the sound is traveling in a different way through water and through soils. I discovered that I could hear deep, dramatic sound in soil, sand, mud, streams, trees, plants. And in this world beneath our feet, even a snowflake lands with a thud, which I was very shocked when I heard that. The sounds are just so powerful, musical, patterned, and dramatic, like nothing I had heard before, and they're just everywhere beneath us. I promise you I will share them with you because I'm building it up a lot now, but I will share these with you in a bit. So I began to ask myself, can sound attune us to worlds beyond the visible eye? The following year, I continued this project as part of a year-long residency in New York City. They invited me to do this at the Urban Field Station. It's called the New York City Urban Field Station Collaborative Arts Program. And in this program, I had full access to the over 10,000 acres that I mentioned before of urban forests in New York City. And equally importantly, I got to collaborate with and have access to a group of amazing people. I had access to everybody that was working in parks and the Forest Service in New York City. So ecologists, social scientists, land managers, and lots of other people. And I have to say that collaboration and integrating knowledge from other fields moved this project and my work forward at a speed that I could never have done on my own. In my culminating work, the Underground Sound Project, I recorded all over the parks of New York City, capturing the soils, trees, shorelines, and also the human impacts, which I'm going to get into more. I found underground layers of sound to be interwoven like a tapestry, connecting these ecosystems in really surprising ways. And for my project, I decided to listen into the urban parks of New York City, but also compare them to a plot of land in a rural area. It's here. And there were differences. The biggest difference that I heard was in the soils. In a healthy forest that was in upstate in New York, I was hearing really, really rich resonant sound. And in New York City and some of the soils, it's so compacted that I didn't really hear much there at all. So I thought that was interesting. Coming from an artist, not from a scientist, but this is what I heard. So I've been all over the parks in the 5 boroughs of New York City, recording every weather, all sorts of terrains. This is all New York City. It's hard to believe, but there's a lot of natural areas there. And I ultimately created a public artwork in Prospect Park. You can see the Soundwalk in blue at the center. It's a loop. And what made me choose this park is that even though it's in the middle of such a tightly packed urban setting, it has spots where you feel like you're in the middle of the woods, which always takes me back to, as you guys know now, my childhood. But I picked a trail in an area called the Ravine that had a lot of the same features that I'd been recording, so I could group them along the walk. And the project took the form of a 1-mile sound walk with 8 stops along the way where you could hear different things, and this is the path. I heard recently that the project was extended, so it's now up until at least the spring of 2024, which I'm really happy about, and they're thinking of extending it longer. This is the project website where you can find the videos. You can do the sound walk in person, but you can also do it remotely. Those are the buttons there. I'm at Prospect Park, or I'm doing the tour remotely to give access to people all over the place. And you can even access the project from any local park as long as there's reception there. So people can take this with them into a park here or in China or wherever they are and listen to the sounds together with their favorite tree or stream. Each stop has videos on a theme. Here you have the plant stop. So I recorded in different places, and I did this intentionally. And we were in the middle of COVID at this time, and I wanted to connect communities through commonality. So these are 3 different places. 1 is upstate, and 2 are both in New York City, but about an hour away from each other. And I thought it was important to connect people. So along the walk, you find these signs at each stop, and then you can use the QR codes on the signs to access the sounds and videos using your phone and your headphones. One thing I have to say for this project is that you need speakers. We have really good speakers here, so you're going to hear these sounds fantastically today. But the sounds, interestingly enough, do not show up with earbuds or laptops or on your phone when you play them. And this is because the sounds underground have they're in the very low frequency range. And that doesn't, I learned that at one point. I wanted to show this to somebody, and it did not play. And I was like, did I lose all my sound? I swear I heard that. But it turns out that it's very low frequency range, so you have to listen with headphones or speakers to hear this. This is a relatively large walk. I most often see smaller groups of 2 or 3 people or a small family. And during the sound walk, you can experience sounds in soils, plant roots, and trees, but you also hear the sounds of human impact. For example, I was shocked to hear the subway in this old growth oak in Central Park. And you guys saw in the video at the beginning of the presentation how surprised I was that the sounds of the subway were permeating through the soils into the tree. I was with the person that was filming that video, and I thought, is there an earthquake? What's going on? It was like so loud it was almost shaking. And then I looked at her, and she was just going about doing her own thing. So I was like, this is coming from the headphones. This is inside this tree. And then it took me a moment to realize this is the subway. Ferries and jackhammers are heard in the soils and waters at large distances. The first time I recorded in the East River near a ferry stop, I had to rip my headphones off because the sound was so loud, much louder. And you know how loud those ferries are above ground. Underwater, it's insanely loud. I had to wonder how the ecosystem was doing in the midst of all of this sound. Studies have shown that many fish and sea mammals communicate via very subtle sound, and we're drowning this sound out with our own. How can soundscape reveal human and non-human relationships? Unfortunately, all too often, plants and trees are seen as objects by us people rather than fellow living beings, which is what they are. They're not objects. And so while collaborating with Novem Young, a social scientist in New York City at the field station there, we were talking about how listening to the sounds inside trees made me feel more connected to these trees. And I felt more empathy and had a keen awareness of them as living beings. She pointed me to reading an essay by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and that's the book that I showed you guys earlier in the presentation. And she's grounded in scientific and indigenous knowledge. In her writing, she suggests using a whole other word altogether in place of it when referring to trees and plants. And the word is ki, and the plural is kin. And again, this word that's missing from English points at such an important concept, the respect and empathy for other beings in our ecosystem. It's important because we're all interconnected and interdependent. I hope that by slowing down and listening to these sounds that almost no one hears, visitors can feel more connected to trees and plants when you hear their interior worlds, and through this feel a deeper empathy to the natural world around them. So now I'm going to play a couple of these sounds for you guys. Let's see. I'm not sure why it's not. Okay. So this always starts with an above ground sound, and when you see the lower image, it goes under. And now we're back to the familiar sound that we hear. Okay, let's see if I can get this one going on the slide before. There it is. Okay. But this is just in the soil. So as you can hear, the sounds are completely different from anything you would expect to hear. You kind of assume that there's nothing there, but there's so much sound. Okay, I'm going to move ahead to another one. This one we heard. It says leaves and acorns falling. That's the sound of a leaf. It's like incredibly loud. And you can hear the grumbling of the soil. Another leaf. That's an acorn. That was a leaf. It's just crazy, like how loud that was an acorn. This was, by the way, the hardest video of all of my videos to create, to get that moment where I was getting all of these things happening. That's crazy, right? A leaf. Yeah. Okay. Let me move on to the next. Okay. No, sorry. This is interesting. This is in the ocean, right at the shoreline in the sand. And now a reminder what it sounds like. Okay, and this one. Oh, this is my favorite one. Melting icicles in the spring. You'll never see them the same. I mean, it almost sounds like music, right? Yeah, it's crazy. This is my absolute, I couldn't believe this one when I heard it. And I'll let this one play out so you can go back to hearing it above ground, because you start to forget what does it sound like normally to us. So we're missing all that every time we see icicles. Let's see, that we just saw. I almost hear the plant holding onto the ground. I find this one kind of sad. But I did want to put in sort of one that had sort of a more positive also impact, because these are volunteers that are helping keep the forest healthy. So that's one of the reasons why I did on the advice of a social scientist. Okay, and I think I have like one or two more to show you. Okay, this is also one of my favorites, but I'm going to say that about every single one. This is inside a tree. Sounds so mysterious to me, this one. It's almost like this humming in the background. Okay, again, how we normally experience the tree. And then I think I only have one more, and that one is the recording that I did that day at the beginning of the presentation that you saw where I got so surprised. No, that's not it. Okay, this one. And I had to turn down the volume on this one, so you're not hearing it as loud as it was. So these are the sounds inside the tree. This is what the tree hears every 10 minutes or whatever, how often the subway comes by. Oh no, wait, no, yeah, that was the last one. So I just have a couple more minutes. So what am I working on now? I'm presently working on several projects. In one of these projects, I'm looking at a neighborhood in New York City called Bay Ridge. And I'm recording underwater in the shoreline there, and the sounds are, as usual, really surprising and phenomenal. And my intention there is not to explain what I hear, but to awake the sense of wonder. And for this project, I'm also interweaving interviews that I'm doing with locals and their relationship to that water. I'm also busy with several projects back in the Arctic. This one is in the Swedish Arctic at the field station in Abisko. I was there in the fall, and this is the first frost, and this is the tundra floor, which is just our ground, which is so beautiful. And I'm working with a group of 3 artists and 3 scientists on a project studying people's connection to local nature there. And a few weeks ago, I was invited to Vienna to be included in an exhibition accompanying the annual Arctic Science Summit, and I let them hear there some of the permafrost sounds during that exhibition. And while I was at the summit, I took the opportunity to sit in on different lectures by scientists on the work that they were doing, and I took part also in a roundtable discussing the possibilities of collaborations between science, art, and social science. And this open environment led to new ideas, future projects, and collaborations with new people. I'm so grateful for these kinds of initiatives leading the way, and the Connections lecture series is doing this as well. So it's great that you guys have this here. We are living in a time like no other, difficulties on a global scale, both environmentally and socially. I encourage all of you to consider collaboration in your future, whether it's just great conversations with someone who comes from a different perspective, field, or place, or whether it's within your field of work. These types of exchanges will help create communities that better understand one another, an openness to the ideas of others, and will spark innovative ways of thinking that will help push us towards a brighter future. You are all part of this future, so let's work together to make it a positive one. Thank you.
So we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. So I'm going to grab a mic, and can you grab a mic too? Okay, I've got a helper. We've got about 10 minutes to do that, and I just want to remind folks as well that the panel discussion is today at 4 in St. Francis. So if you want to meet Nikki or continue this conversation, you can join us there.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm Hillary. I'm the Gallery and Exhibitions Director here at UNE, and that was fantastic. Thank you. So I actually have two very short questions. One is, without having a physical mechanism for hearing, how do the plants that you're looking at experience sound? And the other one is, it seems as though you have a very strong interest in new language systems and vocabularies, and have you come up with any new words of your own?
Okay, so the first question, so I'm not a scientist. This is coming from an artist, but of course I've done a lot of reading and talking to people. And my understanding is that trees and plants, that their roots grow towards nutrients, but also towards vibration. So that might be a mechanism where sound is making an impact on them. And there's, in the animal world, there's so many examples of this. Like elephants have, they can sense vibrations in the bottoms of their feet, and they can communicate long distances with each other by stomping and then understanding that they're somebody in their group is communicating with them. And I mean, the examples go on and on and on about how vibration, which is what sound is used among animals. That's especially been studied, trees and plants a little bit less. Oh, and then the second part of your question was?
It was that you seem to have such a strong interest in new vocabularies and language, and I was just wondering if you had thought of any of your own words.
Oh, you know, no. It's like my contribution is the art part, but I'm super interested in these words, and I definitely, when I come across them and when they're interesting, I'll weave them into my work, and I think they're going to be really important for us as things change.
Hi there. Thank you for your talk. It was great. My name's Alan. I'm actually in our PR office. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things that you said. What was the word that you used to describe the contradiction between hope and despair?
Sucht.
How do you spell that?
SEHNSUCHT. I feel like I'm at a spelling bee.
Thank you. No, I thought it was a really interesting dichotomy.
German word, German origin.
Word. Okay,
yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I had another quick question too. I'm just interested. How do you protect your microphone from the elements? I imagine it's designed to go in water, but like when you're putting it deep in the soil, do you wrap it in something or do you just put it in? I'm just interested to know if there's like a barrier between the sounds at all, or.
Yeah, so I've tried different, like the microphone, the hydrophone, and I think that's the reason that acoustical ecologists first suggested that one. That one did not need any protection because it was already firmly protected from the water where the conditions were going to be even more difficult than in the soil. But then as I started to move into different microphones and I was repurposing things that should be used in different ways, then I would sometimes create a container for my microphone, whatever I had laying around. Yeah, it was sometimes very experimental because that equipment, there's no equipment specifically made for that. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. This is so interesting. I'm wondering if you've ever recorded wildfire below ground.
So, well, I mean, that brings up a lot of things to my mind. Somebody suggested to me, oh, you should record near a volcano. And I was like, well, I don't know how the equipment's going to do right by the lava, which might be a similar thing. But I think it's extremely interesting, and I have thought about it. And I know of a scientist she's very much working with the acoustics around fire. And I may at some point join forces with her and see if I can do that. And I think the way that a forest potentially reacts to fire, I would be interested to see if there's reactive sounds or not in the soil. But I love that question. Yeah.
Thanks, Nikki. Really interesting. Tom Clack from Environmental Programs. So you're making me wonder about disentangling the different parts of the sounds in the soil. Obviously, there's the human elements, there's the non-human elements, and then within the non-human, the sound. Have you been able to tease apart some of the components of those soil sounds? Like, what are the insects contributing? What is the water contributing, and other things in the soil that would have their own distinctive parts of the orchestra that you're playing for us?
So that's a fantastic question. Yes, I have in my own way, because I did so much of it for, I was busy with it for a couple of years. I did start to notice repeating things at in different locations. So I can now recognize if a sound is coming from inside a tree or maybe around the roots of plants that are growing in groups, or water. But I think that it could go a lot further than I did. Like, if somebody would work in a lab and really pull it apart, that would be a way. I don't think I'll be doing that, but that would be a way to do that. So sort of yes and no. I definitely started to understand the language and where I might find these sounds. If I go somewhere now, I kind of know, will there be sounds today? Even like that. And that's not a spiritual sense, it's more like a scientific sense, is it windy, is it this, is it that? That kind of gives hints to what's going on in that location. But then sometimes I get really surprised, things that really, like the melting icicles, that was a really big surprise. I was not expecting that. So it's, it's sort of, I'm in the process of it's a language really, and I'm in the process of learning it.
Hi, so you mentioned the sound of a snowflake falling, and I was just wondering if you had that recording, because when I think of snow, I think of it being so silent outside. So the thought of it making such a loud impact on the ground, shocks me. So I was just wondering if you actually had it here today. If not, it's okay, but.
I don't have it here with me today. Yeah, but it's, it sounds like a little, thud. I mean, it's not, I didn't have to take my earphones off. It wasn't like some of the other sounds that I heard, but I was really surprised that there was this, when it landed, and it was one singular snowflake. So it just speaks to how resonant the ground is.
I also love the sound of the icicles melting. There was a rhythmic musical quality to them. And it makes me wonder if you've ever worked with popular music artists. You can imagine sampling some of that into popular music.
That's a really good
And
question.
can you copyright what you've recorded?
Yeah, okay, I can answer that too. Yes, I can copyright it, the particular recordings that I've made. And I have been approached by a couple of people, so that's something that's in the works, and I find really, really exciting, because I am by no means a musician, so it would be really fun to collaborate with a musician with that. Yeah.
I really enjoyed, I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm an environmental science student. My name is Rosie. I've done oil painting before, so it was really cool to see your color theory and how you do landscapes, because I cannot do landscapes, so it was so cool to see that. And your outlook on vibrations in the soil and ground got me thinking about a new ocean that's being formed in Africa, and if you would ever be interested in trying to hear the vibrations of the tectonic plates shifting. I don't know too much about it. I'm sure it'd take a really long time, but it just got me thinking if you ever want to travel to more places and discover new things.
That's a fantastic question. So I was contacted by, I don't know if any of you have heard of this, of Raspberry Pi. You guys heard of that? And that kind of measures these seismic motions. And I just actually got it in the mail like a week ago, so I just started putting it together. But I was talking with them about taking that equipment into the Arctic. But you're right, I do keep going back to the Arctic. I can't help it, I love it there. But yeah, I'm sure that I'm going to branch out as well to some other places. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It is really interesting. My question has to do with the mediums that you choose. So when we think about all those different ways that you've explored this idea, it makes me wonder what kind of background you had when you first got started. Obviously, art is a key component to that. But most of the folks here in this room are undergraduates, and I'm wondering if any part of your undergraduate experience was sort of a base for that. Like, did you have a double major or minors, or what kinds of maybe experiences did you have in undergrad that mixed media in the way that you now mix media? And my second question has to do with how you choose your installations. In other words, we saw examples of websites, we saw recordings, we saw your art with sound incorporated. I wonder if you have kind of a favorite way to display what you do. And here we're at a lecture. Do you have a favorite way to display and bring all those different types of media together that you just really like? Thanks.
Okay, sure. So the first question is the first part of the question is interesting. So I grew up in a household that my father was a scientist, and I also have a lot of artists in my family, and I actually had trouble deciding between those two exact things, and I thought I had to choose. Ultimately, it looks like, I'm somewhere, floating between the two now. But so that was definitely an influence on me, those two parts of my upbringing. And then my undergraduate school, I actually, at the time, I thought I had kind of made a mistake with my choice. So I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I went to a program in the Netherlands. And at the time, I was visiting schools, and I was like, oh, this one feels right. The one in the Netherlands, there was a really cute boy that went to that school. And I mean, I was young, and I was trying to decide where to go. So I was visiting these places, and I have to say that I didn't fully get all the information that I needed, because I wanted to be a painter only. And when I arrived at this undergraduate school, what I found out is that that everything was okay, but painting was old-fashioned, and you don't do painting. I was like, whoa, okay, I'm here for actually it was a 5-year program, not 4 years. So I was like, I'm here for the next 5 years. And they were not that open to painting. And I continued painting, and I was kind of the rebel at school. I was still painting. But what the school is that it was really good at conceptual art and teaching people how to think about art and kind of expand in that kind of way to the world. And I don't think they thought I was picking much up from at the school in that way, because I felt rebellious to that at the time. But when I look at my work now, it was actually a huge influence to the way that I work and the way that I approach art. So it's interesting how sometimes in life you feel like something that you go through or that you do is maybe you're not happy with it, or it's not going exactly the way you would have imagined, but then sometimes things have a way of influencing you and bringing you to another place. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's I think that's a big part of. And then for grad school, I was much more careful about my choice, and I found a program where there were not too many painting departments solely painting left anymore. And there was one that I found that I really wanted to go to, and I went to that program. So then I did end up balancing out that education for myself. But I'm really, really happy that I got that initial experience at that school in the Netherlands, which I felt so rebellious about, but ended up influencing me in really, really profound ways. Yeah. And then your second part B of the question was, how do I take form? How do projects take form? So I think the projects lately, my projects have been taking form. For example, the project in the park These videos are actually created, they could be shown cinema size, and that's actually going to happen in June somewhere else. But for this particular project, I wanted as many people as possible to be able to access the project. I wanted the project to be outdoors because it was in the time of COVID. So I had sort of this set of what do I need out of the project, and that helped form the final form of the piece of what it looked like. Was what are the parameters that I have that I need to work within, and I wanted it to be accessible to everybody. That was really important to me, that it wasn't sitting inside a gallery where a small amount of people would come in and see it that were already maybe interested in these ways of thinking. I wanted it to, like, everybody to have access to this and be able to see it or bump into it and have the surprise of that. So I was limited. I couldn't project huge images in the middle of the park that way. So it took the form that it did through the website and everyone being able to access it. And that was an interesting process. I had not created a project that way before. So I'm kind of open each time I work on a project to allow the form to grow. Like, I'm not fixed on what is this going to look like. But I do want these videos projected really big in a space where people can come in and experience them completely surrounding them. And that looks like that will be happening soon. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I love the blending of the visual and the sound, the audio. And I was just kind of thinking, I was closing my eyes and listening to the sounds. But I was wondering if you've had anybody that were visually impaired, how they've responded to these kind of sounds and what kind of impact that might have on them. If they've ever communicated with you about that.
Yeah. So far, I think it's a great question. I have thought about it, and I have not had direct contact yet with somebody that is, but I think it's a really cool way of having a relationship with nature in that way, especially if maybe you can't see the spaces. So I mean, what I did have was when this was aired on CBS last fall, I got a lot of emails, and a piece of that, like a chunk of those emails, were coming from people that, for example, I got one email from a woman that is bedbound, and she said that she used to really connect so deeply with nature, and that she had been able through this to be able to connect again. So that was really meaningful to me, that these sounds could do something like that for somebody.
I thought the presentation was really informal, and I thought your art medium is really unique and interesting.
Thank
and
you.
While I was watching and listening, I was thinking, if you have you ever considered trying to record sounds either deeper within the earth or perhaps in like cavernous-like areas to try and get a sense of how sound travels deeper below ground? Because I feel like a lot of the recordings you had were like very close to the surface, and I just thought it'd be interesting to hear what the sounds may sound like deeper below.
Yeah, thank you. And you're absolutely right. A lot of these sounds that you guys heard are within an area about this deep. So at this conference that I was at that I mentioned to you guys earlier, I was speaking to a scientist who is involved with, in the Arctic, there's a lot of extraction projects. So there's a project or industries that exist there. And so this guy works with, there's an iron ore mine in Sweden, and it goes down like, I think, more than a mile. And he said that he came to me after like a presentation, and he was like, I need to talk to you. There's like, I talk to the miners all the time, and they say that there's really weird sounds down there. So I was like, I'm your person. I'll go down there. They're like scared to go down there, and I think that part of the fear is part of the fear is just the sounds are weird, but maybe part of the fear is, does this sound safe to me? Because they're risking their lives by going down there. But him and I are in contact about potentially doing me going down there and investigating those sounds. So that question is right up my alley for what's coming up soon.
So I think we're out of time. Can you hear me? No? Okay,
Yeah.
good. I think we're just about out of time, so we can't take any more questions, but could you just join me again in thanking Nikki for her visit with us today? Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming.